Pete, good morning.
Morning, DA. It's early morning for me.
11:41. Way too early for Pete.
Late night working at the old Mercedes-Benz Stadium. You been to that stadium, DA?
I have not, but it looks absolutely phenomenal.
It's really a marvel. There was a moment like before the game last night I looked out and I was kind of like, wow. What a spot.
Yeah.
What a spot.
I loved your piece today on whether Nick Saban passed Bear Bryant last night, because with those number of national titles now, they're right there. But you've got so many guys unwilling, like Jimbo Fisher, Steve Spurrier, to actually put Saban ahead of Bear Bryant. Why is that? Why don't people want to go quite there within college football circles?
It's a good question. Part of it is because they are like literally tied. So they're each there at 6. But I think, DA, that really what Saban has done in this era in a much smaller time frame is really just a more impressive general track record than what Bear did at Alabama. I believe it's 5-11 or 12 at Alabama. And forgive me, I'm getting the cobwebs off.
5 in the last 9
here.
years. 5 in the last 9 years for him at Alabama.
Yes, and I think he's been there, 11 or 12?
Yeah.
So that's obviously a tremendous amount of success in a short period of time. Bear was 6-25 at Alabama. Interestingly, he almost won a national title at Kentucky, which would automatically have made him the greatest in the history of the universe. That was in 1950. But I just think with the level of competitiveness of college football now, the parity, the essentially 3 playoff games that didn't exist, SEC championship, which obviously they avoided this year, but and then two other playoff games. That just college football is almost a different sport, and that was Jimbo's point to me last night. He was just like, you can't compare them almost, because everything was so different. In Bears' day, they could have 45 guys on 45 scholarships a year. Now it's 25 a year. So, yeah, it was it's a fascinating debate, right? And one of the things, as you well know, DA, that makes great debates is there's really no definitive right answer. So you can kind of go around and around on this for a while, but the Bear arguments are harder to come by as the Saban titles go. And let's face it, Damon, this isn't his last one.
No. And last night you also wrote about Mekhi Brown, who we were just discussing before you came on, melting down to the sidelines. I did not think we were going to see Brown back in that game. Nick Saban usually is a no-nonsense guy when it comes to nonsense like that, but yet Brown is right back in that game. Does that show that Nick Saban, during a national title game with the stakes are that large, has a bit of a sliding scale to the quote-unquote process?
Well, let's face it. Nick Saban's loyalty has always been to winning, right?
Yeah.
If you look at what happened to the tackle 2 years ago who got caught with the gun and the charges got dropped in Monroe, there's, his loyalty has always been to pretty winning, and that's what's driven his process more than anything. So, rolling in an inexperienced guy on special teams at that point in that game was probably a bigger risk than Brown running down again. And that was a heck of an awkward tackle that he did to Sony Michel. It looked like something out of the Ric Flair, who was in the house last night, playbook. But, yeah, I mean, it ended up being a big play in the game. It was a momentum play, and it was surreal to see last night, DA, the undercurrent of kind of uncertainty and chaos on the Alabama sideline, though. You don't usually see something like that. And, Saban stayed above it all, stayed locked in, made obviously the halftime adjustment of the generation, and the tide ended up rolling.
Senior writer, Yahoo Sports, Pete Thamel joins us from Atlanta after filing last night. There was so much success for Jake Fromm and the offense passing the football in the first half, and then after that big bomb that put them up 20-7, it felt like they never really took chances downfield. Did you feel like the Georgia offensive play calling became a little too conservative down the stretch?
I don't know about that. I mean, I thought it was almost too aggressive to start, David, to be honest. If I was going to criticize anything, it was a little bit of like the old run the damn ball lane, except for Jim Chaney. I thought they did a poor job of recognizing that Sony Michel was having a lot more success than Nick Chubb. And I don't know the final numbers off the top of my head here, but they ended up, with a similar amount of carries, and, Sony averaged about 7 yards a carry and Chubb averaged about less than 2.
Yep.
So I just thought as that game went on, if I was going to criticize Jim Chaney for something, it was like, hey, let's ride the hot hand. And they played the change of pace back Swift a bunch too. I would have maybe nudged the ball to Sony Michel a little bit more. That would be my main criticism of how things unfolded for Georgia.
That's a really great point. Sony Michel carried only 14 times for nearly 100 yards. That's a 7-yard clip. Nick Chubb carried more than that, 18 carries for only 25 yards, 1.4 yards per carry. When it comes to next year's quarterback situation for Alabama, I know we're months away, but it'd be hard to imagine that Tua is not the starter next year, right?
Yeah, the Jalen Hurts is transferring to FAU to be with Lane. Rumblings were already starting in the concourse last night.
I mean, Jalen looks like a great guy and would handle things pretty well as he did last night. But, I mean, how could you not start Tua from the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I mean, if you were a talk radio show host in the general Alabama area, last night was a pretty good night for you because, it's probably a slow 4 months after signing day in February to talk about the Tide. So you could keep that conversation flowing for a while. But no, I think Tua is exactly who the recruiting folks thought he'd be. I mean, he is a polished and dynamic drop-back quarterback. Let's just say this, though. I mean, it wasn't like he went in and went 19 for 21. He won the game. It was clearly the right move. He was great, but he wasn't perfect. If you watch that touchdown on 4th and 4, Damon, it looked like he threw to the wrong guy. The wrong guy caught the ball.
Yep.
He threw a bad interception. Let's not put him in Canton yet. He was excellent. It was an awesome story, and he won the game. I mean, it's still remarkable. I mean, Jalen Hurts was the SEC Player of the Year last year. In the entire SEC, there was no better player. So, in your mind, in a lot of people watching the game's mind, using that as a prism, it was obvious. I think in his mind, what was he, 17-2 as a starter or something like that?
Right.
The numbers. He's more than that as a starter. He's like 26-2, and I think he was 17-1 touchdown to interception last year. So the guy has a pretty darn good track record. He would be arguably the greatest quarterback in college football history to lose his starting job.
That's a fair point. I think that while it was gut-wrenching for Georgia, it's hard not to think that Georgia, this is the start of many cracks at a championship, right? Because, I mean, their recruiting classes and what they've now done in 2 years under Kirby Smart, this feels like the one program of the SEC that year to year can go toe-to-toe with Alabama's greatness, does it not?
Yeah, well, the Georgia wins column that I had up on my computer is going to be recycled today into Georgia has emerged as Alabama's top foil column to give you a little how the journalism sausage is made. Going to change a few things. But no, I don't think anyone could watch that game last night. Now, the danger in christening Georgia is that maybe there's a dip, right? You lose the tailbacks. I mean, Roquan Smith is like a, once every 5 years kind of linebacker. So, you have to replace some personnel. You have the great recruiting class. That doesn't just show up and translate on campus immediately in August. So, but big picture, long-term, infrastructure-wise, I think Kirby Smart ends up being the most competent nemesis to Nick Saban that he's seen in his years in the SEC.
And that includes Les Miles.
Well, Les was great, right? He was really, really good, but there were some facets missing there, and there was a sustainability that wasn't there. Ultimately, Les got undone by his inability to develop quarterbacks and make decisions on the offense to keep them up with the just high-end defenses that they had. But in terms of obviously Les beat Nick Saban and went toe-to-toe with Nick Saban, but I don't know if anyone ever felt like he was going to unseat Nick Saban. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
I think history's been a little bit unkind to Les and what he's accomplished, to be honest, because it was a pretty remarkable run. But I just think the whole package, the administration, the recruiting infrastructure, the location, age. Kirby's 42, right? Les is in his 60s. I just think he is best positioned to do that right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Pete Thamel, check out his coverage from last night's national championship game by going to yahoosports.com or go to his Twitter feed right now. He's got all of his coverage from last night at Pete Thamel. Check it out. And he's got a piece coming out today about Georgia and what happens next for a Bulldogs team that should be on the come for a couple of years. Pete, appreciate you doing this with us. I know it was a busy morning for you, so thanks so much, man.